In March 2026, the world economy was hit by a 1-2 punch. China slapped sanctions on global banks, while former President Trump returned to the spotlight with a 300% tariff on semiconductor chips from China. Both moves were sudden, swift, and designed to hurt. Never before had two economic giants fired such massive shots at each other's financial and tech sectors at the same time. The news broke in the early hours with markets still asleep, but by sunrise, alarm bells were ringing on every continent. These weren't just technical disputes or minor policy changes. China's sanctions targeted the world's largest banks, those that keep money flowing for companies, governments, and people everywhere. Meanwhile, Trump's tariffs meant that the price of every phone, computer, and even some cars made with Chinese chips would skyrocket overnight. It was a historic escalation in a trade war that had already simmered for years. But this was a new peak. Why did it happen? The short answer: politics and power. China was angry over new US laws restricting its companies. Trump, looking to rally support, wanted to bring chip manufacturing home and punish what he called unfair trade. Both sides believed they could hurt the other more than themselves. The gamble, however, would soon have consequences for everyone. Within hours, headlines called it the Great Financial Shock. Social media was flooded with worried posts. Experts compared it to the 2008 crisis. But this one wasn't just about bad loans or a housing bubble. It was about the basic rules of the global economy suddenly changing, with no warning and no clear end in sight. Markets hate surprises, and this was honestly the biggest in a decade. As soon as news of the sanctions and tariffs hit, stock exchanges around the world went into a tailspin. The Dow Jones in New York dropped over 2,500 points before lunchtime. In Europe, the FTSE and DAX plunged as investors rushed to sell off bank and tech stocks. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index had its worst day since the pandemic, falling by nearly 8%. Why such panic? Investors feared a domino effect. If banks can't move money easily because of China's sanctions, businesses get stuck. If chip prices triple overnight, companies making electronics or cars face huge costs. That means lower profits, layoffs, and less spending. The uncertainty made everyone nervous. No one knew how deep the damage would go. Ordinary people felt the impact almost immediately. Pension funds lost value, and anyone with a 401k or retirement savings saw their balances shrink. Some banks even placed temporary limits on withdrawals, worried about a rush of customers trying to take out their cash. The mood on the street was anxious and tense. But amidst the chaos, a few voices called for calm. "This is a shock, but the system is strong," said the head of Europe's central bank. Still, as the day wore on, the sense of paranoia grew. People wondered if this was the beginning of something even bigger, a true global recession. Behind closed doors, government leaders moved quickly. In Washington, emergency meetings were held at the White House and Treasury. Officials debated whether to retaliate further or seek a fast truce. President Trump, never one to back down, gave a fiery speech promising to protect American jobs at any cost. In Beijing, leaders huddled to discuss tightening capital controls and supporting Chinese banks. Europe, caught in the crossfire, called for calm and dialogue. Leaders from France, Germany, and the UK urged both sides to step back and avoid a full-blown trade war. The European Central Bank promised to inject extra money into the system if needed. Other countries, from Japan to Brazil, also scrambled to assess their exposure and protect their economies. In the United Nations and World Trade Organization, diplomats worked overtime. Some tried to mediate, but with tensions so high, neither side was willing to show weakness. For many, the crisis brought back memories of past trade wars, but this time, the stakes were much higher. All the while, the public demanded answers. Protesters in major cities called for leaders to stop the madness and save our savings. The pressure on politicians was intense. Could they find a way out, or would the conflict spiral further? While governments argued, corporations went into survival mode. Banks facing Chinese sanctions quickly tried to shift their international operations. Some moved assets to safer countries or used complex legal tricks to keep money flowing. Others warned clients of possible delays in international transactions, fueling even more anxiety. Tech giants, from Apple and Samsung to small chip startups, raced to find backup suppliers. US companies with factories in China worried about getting caught in the middle. Some froze hiring or postponed new projects, unsure what the next day would bring. Chinese tech firms, meanwhile, braced for lost export orders and scrambled to sell extra chips to other countries not hit by tariffs. Insurance companies and logistics firms also felt the pain. Shipping costs jumped as goods got stuck at borders for extra inspections. Some companies even chartered private planes to fly critical components out of China before tariffs hit. It was a logistical nightmare. Amid all this, a few companies saw opportunity. Some small chip makers in Europe and Taiwan suddenly found themselves in high demand. But for most, it was a time of damage control, trying to lose less, not gain more. For ordinary people, the impact was quick and painful. Electronics with Chinese chips, phones, laptops, and even game consoles became much more expensive overnight. A smartphone that cost $800 now sat on shelves for $2,000. Car prices rose too, since many rely on chips from China for safety and navigation features. Banks in the United States and Europe limited cash withdrawals, and some even raised fees to cover their losses. People who needed to send money abroad found it slower and costlier. Small businesses suffered too, as credit dried up and suppliers demanded payment up front. In China, consumers faced higher prices on imported goods. Some banks limited overseas spending to avoid more sanctions. Chinese students studying abroad found it harder to pay tuition as their usual transfer services were blocked. For millions, everyday life suddenly felt less secure. People worried about their jobs, their savings, and how much more expensive things would get if the crisis dragged on. The shockwaves from the sanctions and tariffs rippled far beyond their targets. Global supply chains, already fragile after the pandemic, were thrown into chaos. Factories in Vietnam, Mexico, and Eastern Europe, which relied on both Chinese chips and Western financing, had to halt production or scramble for alternatives. Trade rules written to encourage free and open exchange were suddenly under threat. The World Trade Organization, set up to prevent these kinds of trade wars, found itself powerless. Both the United States and China argued that national security gave them the right to act, but critics warned that if every country did this, the entire system could unravel. Countries caught in the middle faced tough choices. Should they side with the United States, risking anger from China, or try to go it alone? Some started making deals with new partners, but trust in the global system was badly shaken. The world had grown used to cheap electronics and smooth global trade. Now, nothing seemed certain. The rules everyone relied on looked more fragile than ever. In Silicon Valley, tech workers worried about layoffs as startups lost funding and big firms froze new projects. "I've never seen so many empty desks," said one engineer at a major chip manufacturer. In Detroit, car dealers struggled to get enough vehicles, and customers faced months-long waits for repairs due to missing parts. In Frankfurt, a small business owner selling imported gadgets saw sales plummet. "Customers just walk out when they see the new prices," she explained. In Shanghai, parents shared tips online about which banks still allowed overseas transfers, desperate to pay for their children's schooling abroad. Meanwhile, a chip maker in Taiwan saw orders triple overnight. Factories ran around the clock, but even they worried about supply chain snags and the risk of getting caught up in politics. These personal stories made the crisis real. Behind every headline were people struggling to adapt, make ends meet, and plan for an uncertain future. If the crisis goes on, the consequences could be severe. Persistent tariffs and sanctions might push the world into recession. Unemployment could rise as companies cut costs. Prices for everyday goods could keep climbing, and global trade could shrink for years. Some experts warn of a new economic iron curtain, with the United States and its allies on one side, China and its partners on the other. Technology could split in two. Apps, phones, and even the internet itself might become less connected. For travelers and students, moving money or getting visas could become much harder. Governments might impose more controls on banks and trade, making life less predictable for everyone. Some say this could spark innovation and a rush to build new factories at home, but most agree it would be expensive and slow. In short, a long crisis would make the world poorer, less connected, and less certain, at least for a while. No one knows exactly how this crisis will end. Some hope that, faced with real pain, leaders will come back to the table and negotiate a truce. Others fear that stubbornness or political pressure could make things worse before they get better. People everywhere should watch for signs. Will the United States or China soften their stance? Do markets recover or keep falling? Are companies able to adapt, or do layoffs and shortages spread? Simple things, like the price of a phone, the ease of sending money, or the time it takes for online orders to arrive, will offer clues about whether the crisis is easing or deepening. Most of all, the world will be hoping that the lessons of this shock, about how much we depend on each other, will lead to smarter, calmer decisions in the future. For now, the best advice is to stay informed, stay flexible, and hope that cooler heads will prevail before too much lasting damage is done. As the dust begins to settle, one question lingers in boardrooms, government offices, and family kitchens alike. How can we prepare for the next shock? The recent crisis has exposed just how fragile global systems can be, reminding us that markets, supply chains, and even digital networks are all interconnected, and sometimes vulnerable in ways we never expected. Experts are already pushing for change. Some call for stronger safety nets, like emergency savings, backup suppliers, and clearer crisis plans for both companies and countries. Others warn that overreacting could make things worse, urging a careful balance between resilience and openness. Everyday people, too, are rethinking habits, learning new skills, diversifying investments, or simply keeping a closer eye on world events. What's clear is that the next disruption, whether it's economic, technological, or something entirely new, will test how well we've learned from this one. Will governments act faster? Will businesses build in more flexibility? Will people be better prepared to adapt? In the end, preparing for tomorrow isn't just about avoiding pain. It's about building a world that can bend without breaking, where surprises spark innovation, and where communities come together to weather any storm. The lessons from today's crisis could be the foundation for a stronger, smarter future, if we choose to learn them. Across the globe, the aftermath of the crisis has set off a wave of action and innovation. In Europe, governments are joining forces on new cross-border safety protocols, determined not to be caught off guard again. In Asia, tech startups and established giants alike are racing to develop smarter, more resilient digital infrastructure, tools designed to withstand future shocks. Meanwhile, international organizations are holding unprecedented summits, bringing together leaders from finance, technology, and public health to share data and coordinate responses. The old lines between industries and nations are blurring, replaced by networks of cooperation that move faster than ever before. Communities, too, are stepping up. From local food cooperatives in South America to emergency training programs in Africa, people are taking resilience into their own hands. New policies and partnerships are emerging daily, reflecting a world that refuses to stand still. But not every development is smooth. Some countries double down on self-reliance, tightening borders and restricting trade. Others push for more openness, betting that collaboration is the key to future security. The world is at a crossroads, testing new ideas, forging new alliances, and redefining what it means to be prepared. As headlines shift from crisis to recovery, one thing is certain. The response to this shock is reshaping our global landscape. Every innovation, every debate, and every act of solidarity is writing the next chapter in how we face the unexpected together. While global powers mobilize their resources, another story is unfolding in the world's emerging markets. These regions, often balancing rapid growth with fragile systems, have faced some of the most intense challenges and surprising opportunities since the crisis began. In Latin America, currencies have swung wildly, testing the resilience of small businesses and families who rely on stable prices for everyday goods. In Africa, new digital payment platforms have surged, leapfrogging traditional banks and providing lifelines to millions without prior access to financial services. Southeast Asian nations are fast-tracking infrastructure projects, betting on connectivity to drive recovery and attract investment. But the path forward is far from even. Vulnerable economies have watched foreign capital ebb and flow, making long-term planning a daily gamble. Some governments have seized the moment to push long-needed reforms, from anti-corruption crackdowns to investments in local manufacturing. Others have struggled to keep up. Their healthcare systems and supply chains stretch to the breaking point. Despite these hurdles, innovation is thriving. Startups in Lagos, Jakarta, and Bogota are developing solutions tailored to local needs, whether it's solar-powered clinics, low-cost logistics, or mobile learning platforms for children kept out of school. International aid and private investment are being reimagined, with a new focus on sustainability and local empowerment. Emerging markets are not just passive victims of global shocks, they are laboratories for adaptation, creativity, and resilience. Their successes and setbacks hold lessons for the rest of the world, proving that the future can be shaped not only by the biggest economies, but by those who adapt fastest and dream the boldest. As we look ahead, the fate of these rising regions will be a crucial indicator of how truly global and inclusive our recovery can be. As the dust begins to settle, the world turns its attention to the question on everyone's mind: how do we recover? Across boardrooms, academic halls, and virtual summits, experts are weighing in on strategies that could chart a course toward renewal, not just for the wealthiest nations, but for communities everywhere. Leading economists stress the importance of coordinated action. No country can go it alone. says Dr. Maria Lin, a renowned global policy advisor. She points to the need for synchronized stimulus packages, debt relief for vulnerable nations, and targeted support for small businesses that form the backbone of local economies. Public health leaders emphasize that economic recovery cannot happen without strengthening healthcare systems. Dr. Samuel Okiki, an infectious disease specialist, advocates for increased investment in public health infrastructure, noting that resilient societies are built on the ability to protect the most vulnerable. Technology experts highlight the role of digital transformation. Expanding broadband access, supporting remote work, and investing in upskilling workers can open new opportunities and help close the digital divide. Digital inclusion is the new frontier for equality, says tech entrepreneur Leila Hamid. Around the world, pilot programs are already showing promise. In Eastern Europe, community banks are offering microloans to jumpstart local businesses. In South Asia, green energy initiatives are creating jobs and reducing reliance on volatile fuel markets. And in North America, retraining programs are preparing workers for the industries of tomorrow. There's no single solution, but the spirit of collaboration and innovation is palpable. Experts agree. Recovery is not just about bouncing back, but about building forward. Wiser, more inclusive, and better prepared for the next challenge. As new strategies take root, hope is rising. The world has weathered storms before. With shared resolve and fresh ideas, a brighter, more resilient future is within reach. As the world emerges from crisis, one message rings clear. Resilience is not just about withstanding shocks, but about learning, adapting, and growing stronger together. The past months have tested our systems, our societies, and our resolve. Yet, from the chaos, new lessons have taken root. Lessons about the power of global cooperation, the value of innovation, and the importance of leaving no one behind. We've seen that recovery isn't a straight path. It's a mosaic of small victories, collective action, and bold reimaginings of what's possible. From synchronized stimulus efforts to community-driven solutions, the seeds of renewal are already being sown. As we look to the future, the call is not just to rebuild, but to build better. That means investing in people, strengthening the foundations of our economies and healthcare systems, and embracing the digital age with open arms. It means nurturing hope, even in uncertainty, and believing in the promise of a more inclusive, sustainable world. So wherever you are, whether you're a policymaker, an entrepreneur, or a neighbor lending a helping hand, remember resilience starts with us. Together, we can shape a future defined not by crisis, but by courage, compassion, and creativity. The story isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning, and the next chapter is ours to write.